I want to talk about a broad issue that is now happening in American politics, and that is a sudden lack of interest in or enthusiasm for capitalism, the greatest system of markets ever devised by mankind, free markets which have raised half the globe from abject poverty in the last 30 years alone, free markets which have created the kind of prosperity in which you get to sit there and enjoy entertaining shows every single night just by sitting there. Just imagine a world 150 years ago where most people's homes were lit not by electricity but by candlelight, where heat was not a thing, where people died when it was cold outside and died when it was super hot outside, when disease was rampant, when entertainment mainly consisted, if you were lucky, of reading around a fire, but very often consisted of less than that. I mean, the reality is that your life now is so unthinkably great in terms of material prosperity that if somebody were dropped into 2018 from 1870, they would literally not know what had happened. They would think that they were on an alien planet inhabited by a species similar to the one that they knew back home, but in an area of complete material prosperity. They would think they were almost literally in heaven. Remember, like 1 in 3 kids, 1 in 4 kids in families were dying in large swaths of Europe. And child mortality in the United States was a lot higher. I mean, today you have a baby, you can pretty much expect that baby to live till the age of 80. This is amazing, amazing stuff. And that has been brought about by free markets and capitalism and entrepreneurialism. So naturally, that means that we're now going to eat free markets, capitalism, and entrepreneurialism. We're going to dump all over them. And there are a bunch of stories today along these lines. The top one that comes to mind is there is one from Kim Kelly over at Teen Vogue. Now, this is an older piece. It's from April of this year, but Teen Vogue tweeted it out again yesterday. It should be noted, Teen Vogue is supported by ad dollars, and they make all of their money by running stories about the latest products that you can buy. But they ran a piece called What Capitalism Is and How It Affects People, and the tweet from Teen Vogue was why capitalism needs to end. Okay, Kim Kelly wrote this at Teen Vogue. So they're trying to teach teenage girls this. Capitalism is defined as an economic system in which a country's trade, industry, and profits are controlled by private companies instead of by the people whose time and labor power those companies. The United States and many other nations around the world are capitalist countries, but capitalism is not the only economic system available. Throughout history, other countries have embraced other systems like socialism or communism, so it's important to explore what capitalism actually is. CNN recently reported that 66% of people between the ages of 21 and 32 have nothing saved for retirement. However, according to Salon, the reason many millennials haven't been investing in mutual funds or building up their own financial nest eggs isn't because they're too broke or that they lack personal responsibility. It's because they think our current economic system, capitalism, will cease to exist by the time they are in their 60s. In other words, they think that somebody else is going to come along and pay their bills. Bernie Sanders is going to come out of the sky and pay their bills. Capitalism has become markedly less popular among the younger generations, with the Washington Post noting in April 2016 that in one survey, a majority of young adults aged 18 to 29 said they rejected it outright. And this article goes on to try to explain where capitalism comes from. They say that capitalism is evil because individual capitalists are typically wealthy people who have a large amount of capital invested in business. This is false. Okay, individual capitalists are anyone operating in a free market system and selling their labor or their products of their labor. That is a capitalist. Anybody who is involved in the free market is a capitalist. You don't actually have to be the person who is hiring somebody else in order to be a capitalist. As long as you are investing your capital, even in buying products, that makes you a capitalist. But, she continues, these are the people who benefit from the system of capitalism by making increased profits and thereby adding to their wealth. A capitalist nation is dominated by the free market, which is an economic system in which both prices and production are dictated by corporations and private companies in competition with one another. Again, false. Capitalism is a free market system in which prices are dictated by what competitors are willing to sell and what, more importantly, consumers are willing to buy. If you are in a business where no one wants your product, you don't get to set the price where you want to set it. If I could, I would sell this podcast for $1 million per listener. I cannot, because the market does not bear that price. The same thing is true in your business as well. But these basic misunderstandings about the free market lead to the idea that the free market is somehow oligarchic, when in reality, the free market is the most democratic system of property ownership ever devised by humankind. It says that you are the owner of your own labor and your own time. It says that you are the owner of the product of your own hands. But according to Kim Kelly at Teen Vogue, our great economic, clear-thinking source, she says the capitalism places a heavy focus on private property, economic growth, freedom of choice, and limited government intervention, all of which is true. Generally, these tend to be toward the right of the political spectrum. And then she says, how does capitalism impact people? Well, it depends on whether you're a worker or a boss. If you own a company or employ the workers, capitalism may make sense. But if you are not, then it's bad for you. That's a bunch of nonsense. Okay, capitalism, again, has raised the globe from abject poverty. It's the reason why you have cool stuff today. So why do people oppose capitalism? Well, anti-capitalists view capitalism as inhuman, anti-democratic, unsustainable, deeply exploitative, and say it must be dismantled. They see it as inherently at odds with democracy because of how capitalist bosses hold power over workers in the workplace and the fact that the more capital one accrues, the more power they have. Again, untrue. Richer people do not have more power over other individual human beings than poorer people do because they can't compel you to do anything. It's when regulatory capture takes place that they have more power. Power is not just being rich. Power is, are you pointing a gun at somebody? Power does issue from the muzzle of a gun. It does not issue simply by basis of being rich. How many times has a rich person asked you to do something just in your life and you've said no? Probably fairly often. I'm not even talking about things they're offering to hire you to do. If they offer to pay you something, that is not power. That is them offering you a consensual exchange and you saying yes. In any case, the enthusiasm for capitalism has fallen away because everybody gets to be the product of a capitalist system. We all get to live extraordinarily wealthy, long, healthy lives because of capitalism, so that gives us the ability to crap all over it. The same way that spoiled brats yell at their parents who have spoiled them, we are yelling at free markets that have spoiled us too. And even the supposedly socialist countries that folks on the left like to talk about, the Nordic countries, Norway and Denmark and all the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, those are all capitalist countries with socialist redistribution systems piled on top of them. The question for those countries is how long you can keep piling elephants on top of stilts and hope that the stilts continue to support that weight. The stilts are capitalism, the elephants are socialism. It is not that the entire system is socialism. So why is there all this enthusiasm for this sort of stuff in a time when we have, as of yesterday, 7 million unfilled jobs in the United States, a 4% unemployment rate, and a historically booming economy? Why are we talking about undermining the pillars of capitalism? Because we have shifted our mindset in the United States. And this is really what I want to talk about today. We have shifted our mindset when it comes to what our lives should be like. We believe we are guaranteed things here in the United States. We believe that we are guaranteed a solid level of living because we live here. You hear this from Bernie Sanders all the time. In the richest country in the world, should we really have people who do not have enough money to buy all the pudding that they could possibly want? Right? You hear that from Bernie Sanders all the time. The assumption there being, you were born here, you deserve stuff. You were born here, therefore America's rich, therefore you get stuff. A baseline assumption that you are entitled to things. Here is what you are entitled to in a free country. You're entitled to adventure. That's what you're entitled to. You are born entitled to exercise your rights in pursuit of adventure. You get to make up your own story here. That's the American dream. The American dream is people who are coming from across the sea to a place they did not know, to an environment they were not used to, and building lives for their families and creating prosperity from the ground up. The American story is people crossing the Appalachians into wilderness they did not know, places that had not been mapped, going to areas where they had no allies, setting down roots and trying to build towns and civilizations. That's the American story. The American story is poor folks who have an idea and go find funding for that idea and then build that idea into some of the great companies in American history. That's the American dream. The American dream was never, you're here, therefore we give you things. That was never the American idea. And that's not to say that we can't be generous. That's what private charity is for. That's why we need a virtuous citizenry where we take care of each other. But the American dream has shifted now. And what we're told by the left is that the American dream is going unfulfilled if you do not have a certain standard of living provided to you by others. I'll give you a couple of examples of how the American mindset has changed and why it's really dangerous. So the American mindset has shifted radically. And you can tell this in a couple of ways. So did you ever see the movie Cinderella Man with Russell Crowe? It's about Jim Braddock. So Jim Braddock was this over-the-hill boxer who basically had played out the string and was given a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship. And for a while, he's on the dole. It's the middle of the Great Depression. He's on the dole, and he takes money from the federal government. After he wins the championship, he walks back into the welfare office with a roll of cash, and he hands it back to the welfare office. And they say, "Sir, you don't need to pay that back." And he says, "Yes, I do." How many Americans today would actually do that? How many Americans today, if they made the money, would walk back into the welfare office and turn the money back over to the welfare office? I think the answer is pretty close to zero. I think most Americans don't have any sense of shame or guilt about taking money from other folks. They don't have any sense that if they could prevent it, it would be better for them not to take that money. I think people feel in the United States that they are entitled to money because the government is nameless and faceless. See, here's one of the nice things about charity as opposed to the way that it works on the governmental level. The government makes it seem as though the government is handing you the money. The government has no money of its own. The government is taking from me and giving to you, or taking from you and giving to me, or taking from the future and giving it to us now. The government is not a repository of magical money trees. There is no money forest. But the government presents you with the idea that there is. So when the government signs you a check, you don't have to feel guilty about anything. It's just receiving free money after all. However, when it comes to charity, and there are folks in my community, my Jewish community, who receive charity, they feel terrible about it. You can see that. You can see they feel terrible about it. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I think you should feel bad about taking charity because that's what's going to encourage you to not stay on the dole. It's going to encourage you to get out there and work. It's going to encourage you to make a move toward prosperity so you can pay all those people back. If you see the money that you are receiving as a step toward getting your feet under you once again so that you can pay people back, that's a much better way of viewing money than money is growing for free and that you can just take it no matter at any time and at any place. It suggests a lack of entrepreneurial spirit. And unfortunately, I think that that's the way that we're going in the United States. That's example number one. Example number two, there's a lot of talk these days. And by the way, this exists as well in places like Norway. So Norway, which is prized, loved by folks on the American left, they ignore the fact that Norway actually has become a place where the work ethic is starting to collapse. The Economist wrote in 2015, Norwegians have coined a verb, to nav, meaning to get money from NAV, the state's benefit agency. Now, you actually see this happening where people believe that they are entitled to things. The very fact that we call these benefits entitlements as opposed to benefits is suggestive of this fact. That's point number one. Point number two, the idea of picking up and moving. We are the most mobile society in the history of mankind. It is easier to get from one place to another on planet Earth faster than any time in the history of humankind. When we talk about our ancestors in the United States, we're thinking of people in covered wagons taking 6 months to cross the country. You can do it in 6 hours now on a plane, and for significantly less cost. And yet, we are now less mobile, right? Fewer Americans are actually leaving their hometowns. I mean, which is not a good thing. We actually want people to go out there and seek adventure. Right now, Americans are moving less often than they were, right? This is an article from the New York Times. The typical adult lives 18 miles from his or her mother, according to an upshot analysis of data from a comprehensive survey of older Americans. Over the last few decades, Americans have become less mobile. Most adults do not venture far from their hometowns. Well, part of that is because of family. I live very close to my parents. But if I were to move, my parents would probably follow me, not the other way around. If I want to live close to my family, you have to follow prosperity. You have to follow adventure. You have to follow the call. You have to move. But Americans don't feel that way anymore. Americans feel like they are entitled to a job in their hometown where they grew up at the factory where their parents worked. That is not the way that human beings have worked for literally all of human history. And yet now we believe that in order to facilitate people being able to stay where they were originally based, we have to shift the way that the free market works. Well, that's not correct. And again, this is not coming out of a place of lack of sympathy. This is coming from a place where I sympathize with people's plight. And the question is, what can you do to make your life better? Democrats, folks on the left, they like to talk about what can we do to make your life better? And the answer is very little. The real question is, what can you do to make your life better? Because every successful person on planet Earth is a person who at some point said to themselves, what can I do to help myself? America is a country of people saying to themselves, what can I do to help my lot in life? What can I do to be more ambitious? What can I do to stretch my wings and fly? And then we say, okay, well, what can we do to provide that wind? What can we do to get all the obstacles out of your way? What can we do to remove the barriers? That's the American way. It is not the American way to say, listen, it's uncomfortable to stretch your wings. It may be difficult to leave home. It may be hard to do this. But So we're just going to make sure you never have to. Right? We are going to coddle you. We are going to make sure that you are swathed in the warm blanket of government benefits. We are going to ensure that you never have to get out there and fly. Again, this is not coming from a place of no sympathy. This is coming from a place of you can't enervate your children, you can't enervate your communities, and you can't enervate your country on the basis of empathy alone. And that is the best case interpretation of what exactly Democrats are doing here. The worst case interpretation is something much more cynical. The purposeful enervation of an entire sector of the population specifically to gain votes and thereby political power. And after you look at towns like Detroit, it's hard to imagine that's not what's been going on there for decades. Because the failure of this sort of thinking is evident in major cities and counties across the United States. If you actually want to reinvigorate the American spirit, we're going to have to teach people the same lesson that God taught Abraham at the very beginning of the Bible. Right? Get up, leave the home that you were born in, and go to a place you do not know. That's how we become bigger. That's how we become better. That's how lives become better. That's how the world becomes better. That's how trade becomes better. It's why you have cool stuff. It's why cultures become better, because they experience and bounce off of other cultures. This notion that we can hunker down now because we've reached paradise and all we have to do is hunker down and redistribute what's in our backpacks. Those backpacks are going to run out. This is not the way any of this works.